everyone, and welcome back to our general session track. Next up, we have our panel titled ROI, How We Measure Success, with some superb panelists. Please join me in welcoming them to the virtual stage.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the general session track. Again, we're so happy to have you. We have an absolute home run of a panel, which is going to be going on today. I'm Daniel Lackland. I will be moderating the panel. I'm a content lead for AI4. Without any further ado, panelists, welcome to the virtual stage.
Hello,
a
everyone.
big round of applause for everyone virtually.
Hello.
Hey, everyone. All right, so we're going to jump into self-introductions right now. Like I said, I'm Daniel Lackland, content lead for AI4. Subroto, would you like to kick off introductions?
Sure. I'm Subroto Mukhuerjee. I'm currently the head of innovation for Americas region for GSK's consumer healthcare business. And my role in GSK is to accelerate the digital innovation and emerging technology, applying AI and machine learning, and design thinking, automation, and immersive technologies, and blockchain at this point of GSK.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Subroto. We're happy to have you on. Eric, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Great. Glad to be here. My name is Eric Poon. I currently serve as the Chief Health Information Officer at Duke University Health System. I am an internal medicine physician by training. I still practice part-time, but most of my time is focused on the oversight of the clinical and analytics teams at Duke Health.
All right. Thank you so much, Eric. And last but certainly not least, Anurag, would you like to introduce yourself to the crowd?
Yes, Anurag Voleti, glad to be here as well. Thanks for the invitation, Dan. And I actually lead like the data platforms, data solutions, and end-to-end data ecosystem at Boston Scientific. My role is to bring all the digital and data assets together to a point where we can create a system of intelligence that allows us to derive value from data using AI. As you can imagine, AI is not possible without IA, which is the information architecture. I'm glad to be here, glad to learn and contribute as much as I can.
All right, thank you so much, Anurag. Without any further ado, we will jump into question number 1. Rachel, would you like to flash it on the screen? Okay, so let's just set the stage for the conversation. Why is return on investment difficult when it comes to AI projects? Please offer examples insofar as you feel is necessary. Subroto, would you like to kick off this question and offer your perspective?
Yeah, so from AI perspective, first of all, as we know, when you say ROI, right? First of all, the major challenge we are seeing is that organizations defining the right ROI for AI projects. That's the key aspect we are seeing. If you look at the failure rate from the report I was seeing at Tech Republic, that 85% of the AI projects has been eventually failed to bring the intended results. There's a report from Dimensional Research that says that around 8 of the 10 organizations engaged with AI, the projects had somewhat stalled at some point of time, and majority of them, if you see, the data is the biggest priority there. 96% of the same is data has a key aspect for starting the project. So business is still looking at seeing the benefit of AI. At the same time, they're like figuring out how do we really define the investment we have put in? How do we even define the ROI? Is it a soft ROI or hard ROI? So the key reason, again, it's difficulty is to figure out like, okay, how do we really budget it out, right? What's the, when you do the budget and how do you kind of find out the real value coming out of this project? So it's a resourcing factor, it's a data factor, which sometimes we don't know the exact, the clean data is available or not. So if you look at all of this factor together, that's why we start looking at the challenges from AI ROI definition for AI projects.
I see. Cool. Thank you for your perspective. Eric, Anurag, would one of you like to jump in on this topic?
Sure. Happy to take a stab. Agree with everything that Subroto has said. I would actually take a step back. I agree with the premise of the question. Measuring ROI of AI projects is challenging on a good day. But I just want to acknowledge in general that measuring ROI of projects, in general, any projects, AI or not, is not straightforward. And I come to that perspective from having spent part of my career measuring the impact of health information technology on patient safety and quality, and then quantifying the return on investment or return on health of new technologies is often not straightforward. If there's one message I would impart on the audience, however, is that you are definitely not going to understand the ROI if you don't think about measuring it up front. So if there's one thing that I have learned the hard way is that if you want to care about ROI, you really need to think about it and be very disciplined about it at different stages of the project right from the start. In healthcare in particular, the ROI can be sometimes difficult to ascertain, especially when you try to measure ROI in pure monetary terms, because what is the value of a life? What is the value of feeling better in a particular day? There are academic approaches to it, but all of them have their limitations. So what I would say is that it is very important to measure ROI. You need to be conscious about it, but don't take the numbers overly seriously. Because you are not going to get to the level of precision that is possible.
Excellent. Anurag, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would actually piggyback on some of the things that Eric and Subroto mentioned. Like, AI in that sense is actually a means and not the end, right? From an ROI perspective. And Subroto mentioned a little bit around the challenges with respect to data, access to data, talent, and things like that. But at a very high level, technologists have to demystify AI because AI is a term that not everybody understands. So if you were to, again, the challenges are in that demystification. The challenges are attracting the right talent. Challenges are in bringing the right data to a point where it can be, put it in a place where there is rapid prototyping. A lot of leaders, especially who are in this process of adopting AI, should be a big proponent of fail forward, right? Because a lot of experimentation, a lot of rapid prototyping, and that's what AI's power is, which is totally different from typical software engineering where you test to do a specification. Here you are testing to an experimentation. So anyway, that's at least some of my thoughts around what challenges are out there, but it's tremendous amount of potential if done right.
One thing I want to add here is the environmental factor. Like, for example, the COVID hit, right? So we were working on some predictive models on certain scenarios, which is like the COVID changed the whole equation now. Some of the 3 years data which were used for building models now were not relevant, or where like anomalies start kicking into this model. So you have another very key factor which you had predicted a certain ROI or a certain value of your model. This environmental changes or certain events is causing it to change that model. So it's another very important factor I felt was causing the ROI determination difficult. So to add to that.
And one more perspective I would add is that, to piggyback on what Anurag says, AI never exists in a vacuum. Whatever AI you put into place, it provides benefits because it causes different actions to be made or different decisions to be made. And as such, we are dealing with not just computers, we are dealing with human behavior, which is complex and heavily confounded. And therefore, it is actually very important to understand whether a change that you are putting in place that may have an AI component actually leads to the desired outcome in a measurable way. That is the discipline that I think we have heavily embraced at Duke Health.
Excellent. Thank you all for your perspective. That is very helpful. Let's jump to the next question, which is going to talk about what the impact of the difficulty in measuring ROI means. Right. So you all just said, right, this is really hard. So how does the difficulty in measuring AI project performance cause challenges in the enterprise? Why should we care about this for any executive who's listening? Who wants to jump in? Doesn't matter.
I think I'll jump in as well, because we have had to live with the difficulty of measuring ROI in the context of the growing interest of AI in healthcare. I tend to think of the need for measuring ROI at different phases of the life cycle of any new technology, and AI is one of them. Early on, as a technology that looks promising gets introduced to an industry, there is oftentimes a lot of excitement and a lot of FOMO, fear of being left out, and I think in those cases, it is very reasonable for an organization to jump in with some pilot projects to get their feet wet, understand what it takes to do AI well. And in those cases, the return on those projects partly comes from the use cases being focused on, and partly comes from getting a foothold in something promising. So in those cases, the actual quantitative ROI may be less important. Where ROI becomes much more important in decision making is when the technology becomes a little bit more widely adopted, and the shininess comes off of this new toy, and you may have lots of requests for the deployment of the technology that an organization may not be able to take on simultaneously. And in that phase of the technology lifecycle, having ROI to guide whether you deploy a technology, whether you continue to maintain it, and how you use it, what use cases you apply that technology in, becomes core to the good housekeeping of day-to-day business decision making.
Yeah, I would I can't agree with you more there. Like, there is this tangible and intangible aspect of it, quantitative, qualitative aspects of ROI. And I would say, like what I'm going to say is something, if you just were to put it in a positive spin, is something that we should also do, is the challenges is we're trying to do something different by thinking old ways, right? So we have to think differently as well, which is, for example, if you're trying to provide an intelligence to a physician to do better diagnosis of, an image that they're seeing, or a implant that they need to do to make a decision on, we just have to think differently in terms of, the lens that physician needs, or the challenges that end user has. So the end user behavior change that we're trying to move, like to Eric's earlier point as well, that behavior change requires a different way of thinking from a technologist point of view. And we are not used to think about it that way. We are used to thinking about how do we improve productivity, how do we drive more revenue, and that kind of a thing. So that's one challenge. The other big challenge is that some of these things are big, is big thinking, right? So it is think big, but how do you bring agile, lean thinking into your mindset, where you can think big but execute small? Goes back to what I was mentioning around rapid prototyping, rapid experimentation, and failing forward. And then the third big piece of it is that we shouldn't try to measure ROI in a different way. We should still go back to the traditional ways of measuring ROI. It's just a different way of thinking about it. So in that sense, tying it back, and that is not an easy thing to do, because imagine, what does that additional intelligence to a physician mean from a market capture or growth or margin improvements, is the same measurement, but now enabled by technology. And so we should start to think about the older ways of software ROI development, and now we have to think about it from a business perspective.
So I think going to the key part is like, what is the effect of this difficulty to measure ROI, right? So if you look at the biggest challenge I faced in the enterprise world, or in my organizations, other organizations, that how to convince the stakeholders to start investing, right? If you are not getting a ROI immediately and it's not affecting the bottom line or top line, like what is the best way to make sure people understand it? That's the biggest challenge we are seeing. Like we have to present to multiple forums to get buy-in, multiple stakeholders, because many times your AI implementation project spans across multiple lines of businesses. And the next thing is, if you are not the buy-in for initial MVP or initial pilots, and then the buy-in to get to continue to spend money on it till the ROI comes back as more clear to them, right? That's one of the biggest challenge I'm seeing with this part of the measurement of the ROI. The second key aspect I was feeling very much is like keeping the morale of the team. Like if you are being constantly challenged on ROI from a business perspective, how do you make sure that the team who's working on it kind of gives free reins to kind of start doing the experimentation or trying to bring in the new tools and technologies or playing around with certain things, because now you're kind of being bounded with those kind of points like, hey, I have to get certain ROI measurements out sooner. I'm not saying we should not be losing track of that. It's definitely measurement is key part of any value proposition, value added part of it. But those are the challenges we are seeing happening. So if the third point is obviously that I was mentioning as constant infusion of resources and skills, and making sure they are very much motivated to make this happen, as passion to get something out, a benefit for the company. Those becomes a little bit of tricky in terms of being on the constant lens of an ROI measurement. That's what I feel compared to.
Excellent. Thank you all for weighing in. This makes all sense. Rachel, would you like to jump to the next one? This is an excellent segue into the next question. Okay, so given that ROI is difficult and the challenges matter, how do you and your organization think about measuring ROI on AI projects? Please provide examples, whether this be for stakeholders inside, outside the organization, motivating teams, whatever it may be. And anyone feel free to jump in as you see fit.
I can start. So I was reading a very interesting article from PwC on by Anurag. Is like, how do you define ROI? ROI is like, if you look at the top return by investment, right? So return by investment. So return is like you see the benefits of the model, like what the models you are building, how do you are getting the benefits, how much of prediction the models are giving to, and what your deviation is happening from your MAPE scoring to your area under the curve, or if you're having uncertainty of benefits, how do you separate them out, and what's the value of that if we take the benefits versus subtracting the uncertainty of the benefits as part of return. And your investments are typically your resources to build the model and cost of resources. So they are the way you can calculate an ROI as a general terms, or I can say the general formula from a ROI calculation. That's not obviously the case. You have, as I was mentioning the previous first time, is like it's going to be a soft ROIs where you don't understand or they are not immediately visible to you. For example, if you are putting an automation in place, like the benefit of that is like use of time is reduced. We have some man hours calculation, but the effectiveness or use of that value is very important. Agility of the solution. The other factors, if you start looking at from outside when we do the kind of measurements, we are looking at, for example, for giving an example, like we were doing a predictive model for our, say, allergy brand, which we are offering, is like if you can provide the right prediction of when the allergy season is going to kick in, we can have a better media buys from our media segments, like where do you really place the media in the up curve or down curve, or where we should tune down our media. That will effectively help us in having a media savings from an ROI perspective. And then also we have a better way of predicting the certain events in the allergy cycle, and we can have people coming back to our brand websites. You can see the traffic being driven there. So we have a better ROI in terms of CPZs in that aspect. For example, if we were looking at bots we had placed for our websites, like say, hey, if people are coming in and asking questions, how can I improve our FAQs going forward for education for the consumer? If you're looking at what keywords they're looking at, can we use those keywords back into our business and start finding out a better way of bidding for better keywords from our Google search perspective? And in automation, RPA-driven AI automation, we are looking at how many man hours we have saved. How can we better reuse those resources now? Because anyhow, we have a talent shortage now with skills being a big problem. Can we reuse those resources? And those man hours can be then effectively used for something else. There are a multitude of areas we are looking at from an ROI perspective and see how can we really measurement them. Measurement, end-to-end measurement, for if you are doing a supply chain, or if you are having a placement into the stores, what is our supply chain cost savings happening? What are our logistics savings happening? What is our lift in sales because of this tool which we have put in? Is there any lift in sales for that specific region? We kind of go with a region basis and say, hey, if we play this in this region, are we seeing a delta cost increase or sales increase because of this tool we have put in place? That's how we kind of start measuring on ROI from this perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if I can jump in here, I think Duke Health is in the very interesting inflection point that I alluded to earlier, where we are transitioning beyond AI as a new and novel technology that we have had some initial successes into the rapidly expansion phase, where there are lots of potential use cases that are being put forward, lots of people who might be developing models who want to put in the hand of end users. And in the middle of this transition, what we have actually done is to stand up an enterprise governance board, and this is one that I co-chair, together with the Vice Dean of Data Science at Duke University Medical School, to really think about the life cycle of predictive models. And the life cycle that we have come up with for predictive models, and Anurag will be glad to hear, heavily leans on how for example, Boston Scientific might develop a medical device. And so you can think of we actually have 4 distinct phases, if you can bear with me. One is the model development phase. So, and once a model has been developed and there's sufficient evidence that the model could be beneficial, we actually require the project team to put that model in production, but in silent mode. And once in the silent mode, they prove that the model is performing as expected using real-time data, and that they have a concrete plan for how the model is going to be used by the end users, then we allow them to proceed into what we call the clinical effectiveness evaluation phase, where they're actually supposed to do the equivalent of some kind of trial. It doesn't have to be a randomized control trial. It could be a before and after trial. But the key to the effectiveness evaluation phase would call for the project team not just to prove that the model works technically, but it's actually influencing human behavior, be it behavior on our clinicians or our patients, and then causing the intended audience to make the right decisions that will lead to better health outcomes or better operational efficiency. And we asked them to present the results of the evaluation study to us. And if they have positive results, then the model can go into general deployment. They can expand the use with the understanding that they need to monitor the performance of the model and the adoption and the use of the model on an ongoing, recurring basis. With the understanding if the model stopped being used or is beginning to predict things that are somewhat nonsensical, they should take it out of production. So I think this discipline, which we have leaned on our medical device colleagues and the FDA to come up with, is giving us a rational way to look at return on investment and return on health, while not overly prescribing what kind of outcomes the project team needs to go after. And then we ask them to come up with the right evaluation that's fit for purpose at different stages of the life cycle of the model.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that life cycle that you're mentioning, Eric, is super important. And if people want to really look it up, there is actually a specific thing that FDA is governing called software as a medical device. It's an incredible thing, and AI can do wonders in that space, and we all have the challenge to actually, make it right for the patients as well as for the business. And again, going back a little bit and adding a little bit of my insights into this ROI, I have my role is a little bit more broader, like both internal and external, like commercial operations and clinical. So it depends on what lens, and in that sense, that breadth and that diversity gives us tremendous amount of opportunity, as a data leader, to provide that data and platform capabilities. But think about ROI in a completely different way. For example, we're capturing what is happening in our manufacturing floor with cameras and stuff, and then can provide some real insightful things before we generate too many defects. On one side, how do we optimize inventory? So we're thinking about benefits from three angles, right? So one is bottom line, which is the cost to operate, cost to serve, to Eric's point, like, what does it take for us to provide better products and services to our customers? And then the second big piece of it is productivity. How do we make sure that people can, do, like, how do we drive intelligence across the organization internally, but then take it to the top line aspect of it? And if we can provide better products and services, drive higher quality for our patients through the physician and hospital networks, it drives our top line as well. So and then as we start to think about what does it mean for each one of our product offering, for each one of the functions internally, for even from an IT perspective, even IT operations can be optimized using AI, right? And there is a special field of study in that perspective, where you can optimize your IT operations and improve your cost of operations and total cost of ownership. So there's different ways to think about it, different lens. It's like, in that sense, a three-dimensional like benefit story that people can drive who are focused on that elements. And to Eric's point, people who are focused on the clinical side can follow that's very specific life cycle.
Excellent. So interesting to hear your thoughts. I mean, my response to all of what you're saying is that there's an enormous amount of creativity that goes into this. It seems like all of you touched on that. Rachel, let's jump to the next question. Okay, great. So from all these lenses, we can look at ROI through, whether we're thinking about ROI from the get-go, as Eric thinks we ought to, and he's currently doing with his organization. I mean, how much does it cost to do AI well? And this is a common question that a lot of our attendees have, asked me about over the years. So whoever would like to jump in on this, I think it's a really relevant question.
I don't know. Maybe I think we're all smirking. I think I'll infer by the facial expressions of my panelists that a lot more than you think.
Yeah, I was actually going the other way. Like I was thinking that
Oops. Lost the voice. Oh, we lost audio.
Yeah. No, I was actually going the other way, Eric, and I feel like it's probably a wrong question to ask. The reason I say that is because it is like any other investment. You could go crazy, or you could apply and be very disciplined about that agile lean thinking, and be very focused on your customer or your user and do some wonders. And it doesn't have to really cost you a lot. And the recent events, to Subroto's point, COVID has pushed the digital aspect of the world so much. In a multi-cloud, multi-platform, multi-experience kind of a world, it's not going to really be a big thing. And in my mind, the benefit and the impact that it drives, the ROI thinking, will definitely mask, the investment that is needed in that sense. So from an ROI perspective, I think it's worth it. It's worth it, and it's a wrong question in my mind.
Yeah. I see. Anurag, just to add a follow-up. I mean, if you were to address your own new question, which is, how much should I, maybe how should I think about how much to invest at the outset, depending on my priorities? Do you have any perspective on that new question?
Yeah, I don't know if you're looking for a number per se, right?
Doesn't need to be, yeah, whatever you think.
Yeah, I would say that it is going to cost more, to Eric's point, maybe in the beginning, but end of the day, it is supposed to cost you less to deliver the same impact. And traditional software and traditional technologies can only take you so far. It can help you with digitization and workflow automation, but without AI, you can never really get to that digital transformation of intelligent robotic process automation kind of a view, right? That drives your better products and services all the way to how you operate and reduce cost. So in my mind, I would say that it is a necessary evil. And I would say that the sooner that people can really start to spend money in this space, the better or the faster they're going to get to a point where they can beat the competition. Just my 2 cents there.
So Anurag, kidding aside, perhaps you and I have different perspectives because we come from different segments of the industry.
Yeah.
I come from the segment where having a profit margin in the mid-single digits, it's a very good year. And I think, kidding aside, I do think that in a typical healthcare provider organization, and Duke is actually financially very healthy, so I don't think we're particularly poor. And we do have lots of innovative people who are thinking about either developing their own models or deploying ones available from the vendor. I think when you're in the startup mode, it may not take a lot of time to dip your toe in the water. And it's fine to proceed with proof of concepts projects without a lot of infrastructure investment. Where we are currently struggling with, and I think we are actually ahead of the curve amongst our peer healthcare provider organizations, is that because we are no longer talking about 1 or 2 predictive models being deployed in production, we are talking about dozens. And today I have 52 predictive models that are in production. When you have that level of expansion of predictive models, and when these models are actually being used to drive decision-making, not just for individual consumer purchasing, but for clinical decision-making. We're using our predictive models, for example, to identify patients who might be at risk of developing sepsis. And the tolerance for failure in the healthcare setting goes way up.
Yeah.
And that's a point that a lot of our clinical and leadership colleagues still need to appreciate. And the fact that we need predictive models not just to work when it's a new shiny toy, but you want it to work 24/7 when it's in the maintenance phase. You need to look for data drift in underlying population characteristics, sudden changes in the underlying data that might cause the predictive model to fail. It becomes just like any other IT system that needs the care and feeding once AI becomes mission critical. And having the right human and technical resources in place to support something that is, well, if not in the middle of the beating heart, but next to the beating heart of a busy multi-billion-dollar organization, takes a certain amount of investment that people may not be quite ready to make.
Can't agree with you. No, I'm with you. I would say, like, again, this space that you are mentioning respectfully as well, like, I totally agree with you and where you're coming from, like that this initial investment, hopefully we can collaborate at a business level as well, Eric, but in that sense, if you're able to crack that, I think, companies like us are very invested in making that journey happen for you. And once you do that, I think, the leapfrog in the ROI that you will see probably, and tell me if you agree, is going to be huge, right? Do you agree with that assessment that this is the initial inertia, but once that's figured out, that it becomes a well-oiled engine, will give you ROI like that is exponentially higher than status quo?
I fully agree. And you can infer that I'm about to ask for an investment from my leadership, and I'm trying to come up with my business case.
I think it's a very interesting question. It's a tough question to answer, actually. I think to Anurag's and Eric's point, like we cannot just quantify a number as such, but it's also a very valid question from many users or or who are viewers who are asking for. So the way I kind of see that is like sometimes it's difficult to peel out the exact AI cost as such. Is like because nowadays you're using so much of interdependent systems, like you have cloud systems, you have pre-built applications, or you have teams. But if you take it a little bit of thought process, the way I kind of summarize this is like we can build it by a different, the way we have this different sizes available in the market for dresses, like small, medium, and large, or high kind of thing. You can just start categorizing that. It's maybe not the perfect one, but for the way I think it that way is like if you're looking for low hanging fruits or smaller projects to run on, look at a small scale of investment. You have a medium for a very large scale projects or predictive model, which needs a lot of data connections, a lot of data sources, a lot of way to maintain that. And if you have a very high scale where you are touching a manufacturing sector from a computer vision use case perspective, or you're looking at a supply chain logistics perspective, we have gone to that where we have to invest a lot to kind of get the whole supply chain logistics improved from an end-to-end perspective or visibility perspective, right? So if you're coming back to a very simple number perspective that users are looking for is like for small, I would say a range of 75 to 100K to start with. Then you kind of go up depending on this is a CapEx cost, right? Which you are investing initially. And then you kind of having your operation cost being either being a siloed one or kind of being embedded with the other teams you're working on with the IT and all. But this is your initial investment cost. You're looking at a range. Obviously, mid can go up from there and higher from there, like $1 million plus for bigger initiatives. But again, that is like a very depending on how models you're taking up. Is it a hybrid model you're taking up on all the resources up in this country, or you're having a hybrid model if your team's in global? How do you pick your resources? Those cost factors kind of start varying in that range. But I think it's a key factor is like which one you're trying to solve. What is a low-hanging fruit? It's a very mid-sized category. If you're looking for a high-end category, those numbers will slide up, and then your future thing is like how can you reuse your infrastructure from a cloud computing perspective? Because that is a cost sometimes doesn't get added to this. But how do you add those computing costs going forward for running your predictive model on a production scale? Does it need a GPU scale, or does it need that cost has to be factored in? Sometimes it gets into an IT budget, doesn't come into your own AI budget. That could be a way you can think about from an AI cost perspective.
Thank you for your perspective. So one question I have, and I imagine some of the audience members may have the same question. So we talked about in our strategies for measuring ROI, sometimes creativity is necessary, and the end numerical value that you arrive at might be something like, more cost per click, or more, better patient outcomes, something like that, that is quantifiable, but not necessarily from a monetary perspective. And yet, I think most people would almost always want to see a monetary number for cost. And so I would imagine that one challenge is that those two things are not necessarily easy to compare and contrast. And in that situation, what is the answer? Is a stakeholder going to say, okay, I don't really know how to understand this, or there is some level of sympathy around this challenge and it's okay? I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
I guess, go ahead, Anurag.
No, please go ahead, Subroto.
No, my point is that, yeah, it's not about sympathy at our kind of stakeholder thing is like what exactly we are solving for, right? What is the value you're bringing back to me, right? Like if that value is what exactly my current strategy plan is, and it is costing me X amount of money, show me that within like X amount of time. That's the thing we are getting in constantly from our stakeholders, like, hey, is it really benefiting me, or whatever you're taking to this cost model, how much should I pay continuously investing on this one, right? To me, showing me the same results, the same benefits. Do you see a delta change happening? What is our investment factor should be prioritizing for a 3-year plan? When we are looking at 3-year plan, which is what we typically do, those are the key factors you always see in that aspect. So Anurag, sorry, I was cutting you off. Go ahead.
No, we were just raising our hand, and I think Eric mentioned earlier as well. It's like this creativity side is really important. That the other piece is, again, maybe going back to a little bit of fundamentals as well, right? Is that this user-centered design, that design thinking, and ensuring that end of the day we are really adding value, and like AI is a means and not the end, right? In that sense, we shouldn't just be doing AI for the sake of AI and put something out there. And I'm guilty as well. Like, we put some amazing charts out there that people have no idea as to what we are trying to communicate, right? So end of the day, if that user-centered design is embedded into that overall design thinking is embedded into a nice agile lean principles for that incremental shippable outcome driven products, and use AI for driving that, I think is going to drive far more value. And to an extent, people don't really care whether it is somebody wrote a software program that does 100 things, or an AI algorithm that is making interpretations and inferences for in the background. So anyway, just my 2 cents there.
Yeah. And one perspective I might add is that the good news and the bad news is that decision-making at any organization is not done by robots.
Yes.
So, so having a quantitative ROI certainly goes a long way. I would say that is helpful, but not sufficient. I think that, as my panelists have alluded to multiple times, having the right stakeholder engagement, having a convincing argument about how the use of AI would actually benefit the business, having somebody with the ability to articulate that story in a convincing way in front of leadership, and then demonstrating that not only are we going to deploy this technology successfully, we are going to have the resources and dedication and focus to drive the use of the technology to achieve the desired outcomes. Those are typically things that would really help build the case. In addition to bringing to light the consequences of not making an investment in terms of opportunity costs, threats to the business, threats to the competitive positioning, those all go into making the case.
Excellent. Thank you all for your perspectives. Rachel, let's jump to the next question. So we are at the this is going to be our last question because we're near the end of our time. So we're actually going to do this one and then combine that an additional one onto it. So the question is, how many how many AI projects end up as successful in your view? And then if you would address that, and then the follow-up question is, and based on your response to number one, how do you think about how much to invest in AI projects based on the success rate? Does it affect how much you invest? Does it not? Does it affect anything else? That is the question. I'm hoping that makes sense. Anyone want to kick it off?
I can quickly go. Like what I've been reading and what I've been also looking at other places is like 10 to 20% is range I'm seeing successful. That's happening. It's more of production grade successful. But again, as the investment and the more focus is going up, that is going up. Again, based on that, if you look at the next question, follow-up question to that is, obviously, this is a successful rate. We have 20-30% the pilot stage or MVP stage is still going on in the industry. Typical, I'm not sure Anurag and Eric might have different viewpoint there. But coming back to the next follow-up thing was like, how much of a risk we can take going forward because of this failure, right? The key thing is like, what is the risk of not doing this, right? And the thing is like, what should be doing is like, what is the risk of doing this and not doing this? At the same time, when we do this, what additional risks do we start bringing to that factor? It has to be very critically thought about it. So I think looking at the outcome approach from this perspective is, from the future investment, you should look at a very clear clarity of the use case, of what you really need to have, right governance structures that should be in place to support this initiatives going forward, right roles and responsibilities for people to understand the value or not getting the risk solved or getting the value of the investment. At the same time, like what is the appropriate risk management tools coming to the play to support this initiative going forward, right? So that will count to your planned investment going forward. And obviously value will be the key driver for this whole things. So that's my take.
I think a word of caution about the question you're posing is that you don't want 100% of your AI projects to be successful, because if that's the case, then you are doing AI projects that are exclusively low risk. I think as with all innovation endeavors, you want to have a portfolio of projects, ideally somewhere maybe high risk, high reward. Others are more surefire initiatives that will likely yield an ROI. So I think I agree with Subroto that many of these AI projects are not going to be successful. I don't have a number, but to harken back to what Anurag said early on in our conversation, we want organizations to fail fast and fail forward with AI. The worst case scenario would be to let AI technologies and AI projects linger on without clear end in sight and clear points of evaluations.
Yeah, I kind of agree with more, with both of you, right? In the sense that the cost of not doing it is much higher than that failing fast. And if you are not really experimenting and innovating, then AI is not the space. If you really know exactly what you want to go after, then use traditional software technologies. But if there is that ambiguity that you want to really understand and be data driven, then gut feel driven, which is how most of the organizations are run, hire super awesome talent and sell as much as you can, build as much as you can that meets your customer needs. Yes, you can stay in that world, but companies that can experiment and now be data driven using AI will obviously see the market, will see their products, will see their services, and see their customers and understand their customers better. So in that sense, experimenting to learn about that is far more important. It's just because there's no way that you will ever know everything that is happening in your customer base, especially for any size company. So anyway, so in that sense, yes, if you are that celebration of those failures is far more important, because those failures will teach you a lot more in terms of how to provide better products and services, internal and external.
Yeah. Well, what I will also say is that there is a ton of opportunities to apply AI to improve business processes and clinical outcomes. And we are barely scratching the surface. I do think one challenge that we have is to help our organization in different levels recognize opportunities to apply AI to help solve an existing problem. And that level of education sounds easy, but it's incredibly hard when you're dealing with a large organization with different levels of data, let alone AI literacy. there still is a lot of magical thinking about AI out there because AI is very powerful and sometimes does look magical. And trying to help the organizations identify the right set of opportunities to focus on, in some ways, is part of our challenge amongst my leadership colleagues, and I suspect it's a similar challenge in other organizations.
Yeah. So piling on top of that one, yeah. If we were to approach it like let's solve or let's do AI, that's a completely, in my mind again, people can disagree. Is that if we were to approach anything like let's do AI is a wrong way of approaching it, right? So let's solve this problem, and people who are really, really smart in AI can say, yes, AI can take this thing to the next level. That's the best way of doing it. So looking at it from a user-centric design or a customer-centric view is far more important.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. This was absolutely fantastic. The best we could have hoped for. We really appreciate it. If you are watching this session as an attendee, go ahead and jump into the next session or join one of the town halls later. We're very excited to have you here. And once again, thank you so much.
Yeah. Eric, Subroto, nice to meet you again.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you all so much. That was awesome. A big virtual round of applause. Hear them roar. Please make your way to your next session. Also, don't forget to check out the networking, accept your connection request, and explore the AI exhibits. Have a great time.